And just like that, their story takes another unexpected turn. But wait, before you go, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I read everyone. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss the next heartwarming chapter dropping tomorrow. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay cozy, stay curious, and keep believing in love's surprises in the bustling heart of New York City, where dreams rise as tall as the skyscrapers. 23-year-old Emily Chen was just trying to survive. Juggling 3 part-time jobs and barely scraping by, she carried the weight of her family's $120,000 debt like an invisible anchor. But beneath the stress and sleepless nights lived a spark, a talent for art that she had quietly nurtured since childhood. One day, luck, or perhaps fate, gave her a shot. She landed a temporary position at a small animation studio downtown, a chance to finally prove her skills. Little did she know this opportunity would lead her straight into the path of Ryan Grant. Ryan wasn't just any man. He was the 30-year-old CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, known for being brilliant, ruthless, and as emotionally distant as the moon. That day he walked into the studio unannounced, reviewing their latest project for a potential partnership. As soon as he saw the animation on the screen, his expression darkened. It was a blatant rip-off of a well-known Japanese series. Furious, he called out the entire team for plagiarism and immediately terminated the contract. But the studio's manager, desperate to save face, pointed the finger at Emily, claiming she was responsible for the copied artwork. Emily was stunned. She had poured every ounce of creativity into the storyboard sketches, none of which were even used. Still, she was the scapegoat. And Ryan? He didn't care to hear her side. Cold and dismissive, he walked past her without a glance, even stepping on her sketchpad as he left. That was the final straw. Fueled by frustration and years of swallowing injustice, Emily marched after him, grabbed his wrist, and demanded that he respect her work. Ryan, caught off guard by her boldness, looked down at her with a smirk. He mocked her art, calling it amateur and a waste of resources. But Emily didn't back down. With tears in her eyes and fire in her voice, she defended herself fiercely, even going as far as to accuse him of defamation. Then, in a move that shocked everyone in the room, she pulled out her phone, flashed a QR code, and demanded he compensate her for the damage. Silence fell. After a long pause, Ryan, perhaps amused, perhaps intrigued, tapped his phone and transferred the money. Without another word, he walked out. Emily stood there, breathing heavily, not knowing that this fiery exchange was only the beginning. Because Ryan Grant, the CEO who never looked twice at anyone, suddenly couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the sharp tongue and burning eyes. He had come to cancel a contract, but left with a curiosity that would soon lead to something neither of them expected. Emily thought the drama was over after her bold confrontation with Ryan Grant, the cold, arrogant CEO who had accused her of plagiarism. She stood her ground, got her compensation, and walked away with her pride intact. But what she didn't know was that on the very same day, Ryan's world had shifted too. Back at his glass-walled penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, he received a letter that changed everything. It was his late father's will. Ryan scanned the contents without much interest until one line stopped him cold. To fulfill my final wish, my son shall marry the daughter of my best friend, Mr. Chen. Ryan stared at the paper in disbelief. Mr. Chen? That name sounded familiar. He turned to his assistant and ordered a full background check. A few hours later, the truth hit him like a freight train. The woman he had just insulted, humiliated, and paid off, Emily Chen, was the very girl his father wanted him to marry. He didn't know whether to laugh or punch a wall. Of all the women in New York, it had to be her, the stubborn girl with fire in her eyes, the one who had grabbed his wrist, demanded justice, and walked away without blinking. She was nothing like the obedient, polished heiress he had always pictured, but strangely enough, that made things even more complicated. He couldn't stop thinking about her. So, in true Ryan Grant fashion, he came up with a plan. No games, no drawn-out chase. He would find Emily, Offer her a deal, marry him, settle her debts, and they'd both go their separate ways in peace. When he pulled up in his sleek black Mercedes outside her tiny studio apartment, Emily had just gotten off a grueling 12-hour shift. She was exhausted, covered in charcoal smudges from sketching, and definitely not in the mood for surprises. Then she saw him, Ryan Grant, standing there like a scene out of a drama, perfect suit, unreadable expression, holding out a contract. "I want to marry you," he said, calm and collected. "We both get what we need. You clear your debt, I fulfill my father's will." Emily blinked once, twice, then laughed hard. "You think I'd marry a man who disrespected me, insulted my work, and thinks he can solve everything with money?" She shoved the contract back at him. "I may be broke, but I'm not desperate." Ryan didn't flinch. "It's just business." "No," she snapped. "It's my life." The tension crackled between them like electricity. But what neither of them realized in that moment was this. They had just crossed a line. What started as a cold, calculated arrangement would soon become something far messier, something real. And no contract in the world could prepare them for what came next. Emily slammed the door behind her, heart pounding. She couldn't believe what had just happened. First, Ryan Grant accuses her of plagiarism, then shows up at her apartment with a marriage contract like he's starring in some twisted soap opera. And the worst part? A small, traitorous part of her actually considered it. Not for the money, but for the man behind the cold exterior, because somewhere between the heated argument at the studio and the way he looked at her tonight, something changed. But Emily wasn't the type to get swept up by a man with a pretty face and a checkbook. She had dreams, dignity, and debt, yes, but she wasn't for sale. Still, Ryan wasn't the type to give up. The next day, she opened her door to a mountain of designer shopping bags, shoes, clothes, perfumes, brands she'd only seen in magazines. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then came the note. "Let's start over." Furious, she stormed into his office, right past security, straight through the glass doors, and slammed the card on his desk. "Take your bribes back." Ryan leaned back in his chair, smirking. "It's not a bribe, it's an apology." Emily narrowed her eyes. "If you want forgiveness, try saying sorry like a human being, not a billionaire." There was a beat of silence. Then, without missing a beat, he said, "Fine, but only if you agree to dinner." She scoffed. "You've known me for 5 minutes." "Know enough," he replied, voice calm but firm. "You're stubborn, smart, and you don't let anyone push you around. That's rare." She blinked, caught off guard. It was the first compliment he'd ever given her. Dinner didn't go as planned. It was supposed to be formal, cold, transactional. But instead of business talk, they laughed. She teased him about his tie. He complained about her taste in food. And then came the moment, accidental, unexpected, when they bumped into each other outside the restaurant, and their lips almost touched. Almost. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Neither could Ryan. But where there's tension, jealousy isn't far behind. Josh, her college friend, showed up the next day to drop off a sketchbook she left behind. They hugged. Innocent, platonic, but not in Ryan's eyes. He saw them from his office window, and something snapped. The next thing Emily knew, Ryan was at her school, pulling her aside, scowling. "Who is he?" "None of your business," she snapped. "We're engaged," he reminded her. "Fake engaged," she corrected, arms crossed. But the damage was done. Ryan's jealousy was out in the open, raw and messy. Emily stormed off, and he was left standing alone, realizing something he wasn't ready to admit. This wasn't just a deal anymore. He was falling for her, and fast, and if he didn't act, soon he might just lose the one person who saw through his walls and into his heart. Ryan couldn't shake the image of Emily walking away from him, not because she rejected his jealousy, but because she was right. They were only pretend fiancés. At least, that's how it started. Now, it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers, and the one person he didn't want to lose was the one person he was too afraid to be honest with. But Ryan had bigger demons to face, ones that went far deeper than love. That night, he stood alone in his penthouse, staring at a locked drawer. Inside it was a small jade pendant, his brother's. the only thing left from the boy he couldn't protect. Years ago, in a crowded subway station, Ryan's younger brother had been shoved and trampled in a panic. Ryan had watched it all, frozen, unable to move. The guilt became his shadow, one he carried into adulthood. He'd built walls so high no one could climb them, not even himself. Emily, meanwhile, was trying to push through her own storm. Her comic had been falsely accused of plagiarism, and though she tried to stay strong, the whispers, the online comments, and the pitying looks chipped away at her. One night, she broke down, alone in her tiny apartment, crying as a scary movie played in the background, anything to drown out the noise in her head. She never expected the knock at the door. It was Ryan, standing there in a hoodie, holding a steaming bowl of her favorite, snail noodle soup. "You didn't answer my texts," he said, eyes soft for once. She tried to act strong, but her voice cracked. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," he said, stepping inside, "and I'm not leaving." That night they sat side by side on the couch, watching the horror movie in silence. When she flinched, he flinched harder. She turned to look at him, this arrogant CEO who once mocked her dreams, now jumping at fake jump scares and clutching a pillow like his life depended on it. She laughed through her tears. "You're scared." "I'm traumatized," he muttered, eyes still on the screen, and somehow in that ridiculous, vulnerable moment, the walls between them cracked. Emily finally opened up. "I feel like I'm losing everything. My work, my name, myself." Ryan turned to her, voice low. "You're not alone." The next day, Ryan made a decision, one that terrified him more than any boardroom deal. He agreed to see a therapist. With Emily by his side, he walked into the mental health clinic, trembling, fingers twitching but determined. During the session, the truth poured out, the accident, the guilt, the nightmares. Emily sat beside him the whole time, holding his hand, never letting go. Afterward, he looked at her with eyes full of something deeper than gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." What he didn't say, but what Emily already knew, was this. The cold-hearted CEO wasn't so cold after all, and she was the only one who had ever reached the warmth buried underneath. After everything they'd been through, the fake engagement, the fights, the laughter, the late-night confessions, Emily and Ryan were no longer pretending. Not really. Somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred, and what started as a contract turned into something neither of them could ignore. But just as they were starting to figure it out, life threw them one final test. Emily's comic was gaining recognition again, finally cleared of all plagiarism accusations thanks to Ryan's secret intervention. She was excited, hopeful, and ready to tell him everything, that she was in love, that she didn't want this to be fake anymore. But when she arrived at his apartment, she saw something that stopped her cold. Another woman, Sabrina. Smiling, holding a wine glass, her purse casually tossed on Ryan's kitchen counter. Emily's heart sank. Her mind spun with every worst-case scenario. She didn't wait for an explanation. She turned and walked out. Ryan, oblivious to the storm brewing, had been trying to set up the perfect night. He had hidden a ring inside a cake he baked himself, burnt edges and all. But when he opened the door and saw Emily was gone, a terrible feeling hit him. Sabrina had deliberately stayed behind, knowing Emily would come by. Her plan had worked. Again. The next day, Emily ghosted him. No calls, no texts, nothing. Ryan was spiraling. He didn't understand why she disappeared, until his assistant mentioned the guest from last night. Furious, Ryan confronted Sabrina and officially cut ties. Then he did what he should have done all along. He chased after the girl he loved. He found her on the rooftop of her apartment, sketching, headphones on, pretending everything was fine. But when she looked up and saw him, her walls crumbled. "I saw her," Emily said quietly, "and I thought I was just another temporary chapter in your story." Ryan stepped forward, reached into his coat, and pulled out a familiar ring. Box, slightly dented, frosting still clinging to the edges. "You were never temporary," he said. "I've been building a life around you, and I didn't even realize it until you walked away." She blinked, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want a contract," he continued, voice shaking. "I don't want conditions. I want messy, loud, honest love. With you." Then, in the middle of that cold rooftop, under a sky streaked with the last colors of sunset, Ryan dropped to one knee. "Emily Chen, will you marry me for real this time?" She stared at him, stunned, then dropped her sketchbook, laughing through her tears, and nodded. "Yes, Ryan. I thought you'd never ask." As they kissed, the city lights below flickered like stars. The cold-hearted billionaire had fallen completely and unapologetically for the girl who once stood up to him with nothing but a sketch pad and a spine of steel. Because in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about finding the one person who sees your mess, your flaws, your fears, and chooses you anyway. What a journey, right? From strangers bound by a contract to two hearts learning to love in the most unexpected way. But now I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in Emily and Ryan's story? Was it their fiery first meeting, the slow-burn romance, or that emotional rooftop proposal? Maybe you've experienced a love that started in the most unlikely place, or maybe you're still waiting for your own unexpected twist of fate. Either way, scroll down and drop your thoughts in the comments. And hey, where are you watching from? I always love seeing where our story-loving community is tuning in from around the world. If you felt something, laughed, or even got a little teary-eyed during this episode, let me know. Your feedback means so much. It helps shape what stories we share next. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. There's always another surprise just around the corner. Thanks for watching and being part of this storytelling family. Can't wait to read your comments below.